Well, we start this morning with, I'm trying to remember. In fact, Tquan, I tried to, do the Rolodex back to remember, when did I meet Tquan Moore? Tquan is one of those guys that when you see him, your first thought is, and God, you gave that body to him and not to me. Tquan is a guy who you look and say, man, I wonder what sport he's into. And from my son's reports, because he serves the church where he's at, he's into most of them. Tquan is not just that, but he is a husband to Leanna, a father to Katie, Sienna, and Corbin. That's, count them, 3 kiddos. He's been in ministry for over 25 years. And I asked him before the program, so you started like when you're 10, but how long you worked at the Hills now, man?
5 years.
5 years there. Yeah. And your role there is worship minister to students. Now, yeah. For those of us who may have served in congregations of 100 or 200, tell us what the worship minister to the students does.
Yeah, so I have middle schoolers and high schoolers on a worship team that we do. And Wednesday nights is when our gatherings come together. And so we try to lead worship and try to raise up worship ministers out of our students. And so try to get them up there as much as possible. And that's it's always exhilarating, sometimes cringing, but God is always in the room no matter what. So
you're raising up the next generation of Tquan Moores and Randy Gills and whomever. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, it's fun deal.
Praise God for that.
Yeah.
Well, sometime we got to have you talk about worship, but today I want to hear about Unity Builders. Now, this is about a year-old ministry there at Richland Hills, and I've heard some great reports about it. And if you had to describe what Unity Builders is a sentence, what would you say?
Oh, I would say Unity Builders is a ministry that we're pursuing racial unity at our church. Yeah, that's the real nutshell version. There's a lot more to that, but yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let you say some more about this. Now, to put some context, your church is in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yes.
And how diverse would you say that the Hills is?
I don't know the actual numeric demographics, but yeah. Just as a minority, we are a very white church, primarily Anglo church. We do have more people coming in. I think that's just because our area is changing in diversity, but we do not look like the demographics, percentage wise. And so
okay. All right.
That's where we are.
And is Unity Builders, is this about seeking to make the church more diverse, or, what's the kind of target?
Yeah. So, man, Unity Builders was birthed out of the idea of making us diverse. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of getting to the goal.
Okay.
Because diversity and unity, they can be very different. You know what I'm saying?
Amen.
And so,
yeah, I do. Well, let me get out of your way then. You take off with it. Tquan, we are glad you're here. Boy, what a crazy understatement. The last year or two have been really challenging with regard to folks who are stepping into the intersection of faith and race and violence and trying to bring unity. So if nothing else, let me say, God bless you for the good work that you're doing. Share some things that might be helpful to us thinking about youth ministry as well as churches. Go for it.
Cool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to share my screen here and go to presentation I put up. And that's primarily so I stay on track, because the deal is so huge that that I could talk forever. Okay. But as we said, Unity Builders it's an attempt at racial unity in our church. Okay. And let me also back up and say, hey, I'm coming at you guys as a learner. Okay. I don't want you to hear, man, oh, they're doing this great ministry. It's been going on for so long. We're doing something, but man, if you're interested in bringing diversity or unity or anything like that to your church, and you're going, man, what are they doing? We may just be a step or two ahead of you. So just hear that. I'm not sharing as an expert, I'm sharing as a learner. Okay. And so And I want to share with you just a couple things I feel like we're learning, and then I want to open it up for questions because I think that's where we're going to really get the best bang for our buck out of this thing. Okay, and so with Unity Builders, like I said, we're learning and we're looking at ways to pursue racial unity. Okay, and here's the first thing I want to say. You need to understand exactly where you are headed, because this idea of diversity, racial reconciliation, social justice, all those things kind of get mixed together. Sometimes used synonymously, and often they're not. And you will communicate a word and think that you've said what that everybody understands what you say, but they have a different definition for that word. And so understanding the goal with acute clarity is extremely important. So I want to throw up the Unity Builders mission statement. Okay, and Unity Builders exists to cultivate a culture of oneness at the Hills Church that reflects I can't even see the screen. Sorry. That reflects the church. Sorry. Let me try this again. Our ministry exists to cultivate a culture of oneness at the Hills Church that reflects, and I can't even see that piece there, but we want to reflect God in that. We want to seek to help people understand our differences, value diversity. We want to build authentic relationships and facilitate reconciliation where racial, ethnic, and cultural differences have divided us. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do, and that is Unity Builders' goal. Okay, and actually we're trying to spread that definition as well. I think with most people at the Hills, they talk about when we started talking about this change and becoming more diverse, that's the word that we use. Okay, and you can easily get to this idea that with diversity, you can go, okay, as long as we have the number of people in the pews that look different, maybe from different backgrounds or whatever, then we've arrived. And I want to say, well, no, not really, because you can have that at a football game, and you wouldn't say that those people are together necessarily. Okay, so I'm gonna go through a little checklist here. It says we want to cultivate a culture of oneness. Our goal is unity. Okay. Equality is a part of that. Making sure that there's representation of races is involved in that. But more than that, we want to take all of that and help drive us all towards the goal of what God wants us to do. Because we're talking about unity in the church, unity in our country or whatever would be awesome. But when I look at John chapter 17, which is a driving passage for me, where Jesus is praying, he's praying in the garden, he prays for himself, he prays for his disciples, and then he prays for us. And his prayer for us is that we might be one as he and God are one. As he is in God, we will be in him, and we have this oneness. And I believe that racial unity is a piece of that. It isn't what Jesus is asking for. What he's asking for is far larger than this. But man, if we don't get this, we aren't going to get what Jesus is praying for. And so, and he's praying for, which tells me it's going to happen. This is not just something that, oh, it's a nice thing. But man, when Jesus prays for people to come out of the grave, they do. And so this is in the heart of God. So this is occurring, and we're just trying to jump on board to what God is already doing. Okay. So our goal is unity. And we feel like we're going to do that by one, helping people understand our differences. Okay. We all know that we have them, but this idea of understanding our differences, I think comes from teaching people to listen and listen motivated by love for the other person. Okay. Many of us have been in conversations where we are talking to someone and they're hearing us, but you can tell that they are listening and waiting for you to finish so they can say whatever their next point is, whether it's for what you said or maybe it's against what you said. But the whole thing is they're not listening to understand, They're listening for a gap so they can get their point in there. Okay. And so one of the things that we use is a thing called Be the Bridge. If you haven't heard of that, you need to check that out. Be the Bridge, I think it's .com. And their goal is to get people around tables and different people and talking about the issue, raising awareness, getting relationships built. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if we don't teach people to listen with love, so I can understand, I don't live where you live. I would love to be able to put your shoes on, but even when I put them on, they're going to feel funky for me, So the whole idea is, man, if I can just listen because I care about you and I want to understand, then we'll move the mark in building unity. Okay. The next piece is that we want to value diversity, embracing these differences because all our differences come from God. They tell us something about who God is, right? And so oftentimes we look at our differences and wonder what's wrong with them. Why aren't they like me? Or that's odd. Even if you don't want to, we just want people to learn to embrace the fabric, the how the world just kind of comes together, and we learn different things from different cultures, different groups, and so forth. Okay. We want you to build authentic relationships. And we would want that to happen in any scenario in our churches anyway, right? But we're saying, let's cross these racial lines and build these authentic relationships. And here is why. Because a lot of time, the debates that occur when you start talking about diversity, you start talking about social justice, you start talking about all that stuff, you start to debate points. You debate, how do we go about making sure that other people get involved, and how much power do we give, or this and that and the other, okay? And when we build authentic relationships, we don't end up fighting for points and fighting on points so much and trying to get our ideas heard as much as we end up fighting for people. That's a huge one. Okay. A lot of conversations get derailed as soon as you start going back and forth about points. But when you have a person in mind, and you're talking with somebody else who may even be coming from a different viewpoint, but you both know that you love this individual, then you are both working for that individual that you love. You're trying to lift them up, okay? As opposed to fighting about the points, you're looking for a mutual way to help, even if you're coming from different sides of the table, if that makes sense, okay? And lastly, which I think may be the hardest one, is facilitate reconciliation. One of the things that I am learning about the hills, this may be the first time this is ever recorded or whatever, but I think that on a whole, we think that we're safe for minority groups, but I don't think that we actually are. Okay. And this is what I mean. If you're familiar with the term microaggression, okay, where there are these things that people say or do that kind of expose a bias towards a certain race or person, and they're not like, it's not overt, it's not like they're putting on the hoods and burning crosses, okay? It's not like that. But there are these things that are said that, man, they may not even realize they're saying, but they're exposing that, oh, there's a lessening value or certain viewpoint that they have about you that is hurtful, okay? And so when you have those going on a regular basis, and oftentimes they happen on social media, by the way, okay? So when you have those and they're coming from people in your church, and you have that person that you want to invite who may be a minority, and you're thinking, man, I'm going to come and bring them, and I want them to meet my church family, but you don't know if they're going to say something that's going to be super harmful to this person, you think twice about inviting them. Does that make sense? And so what feels like, man, when we're all together and we're going and doing things, so forth, feels like, man, love as a family, as long as things kind of stay the same, that feels pretty good and safe until you bring somebody from the outside in and they got to deal with, man, how those microaggressions or things that we typically do that we don't even think about. Okay. And so trying to facilitate this reconciliation, help bridge these gaps that separate us, help open our minds, help us to see people differently, help us to listen to what we're saying, help us to see our reactions. All those things come with the facilitating reconciliation. And that means that things are broken and they need to be fixed. We're called to be peacemakers, which, you know, when I've looked at the Beatitudes before, I was like, oh, peacemaking, that sounds nice. That's hard work. You know, I mean, that is in the trenches work. Okay. So that is our goal. And we list all that out because there are very specific things that we know that we want to go after. Okay. Do we know how to go after them all? Absolutely not. But man, they are the target and we're trying to figure out ways. Okay.
Let me jump in with a question, if you'll let me.
Sure thing.
You know, this is such a beautiful list, and I'm seeing it through two different eyes.
Okay.
I'm seeing it through the eyes of the students, who I think would probably, I mean, I can't imagine there's one of your students who couldn't define microaggression. And then I look at it through the lens of their parents, who may be a little less tuned in. One, as you work with the students and parents, do you sense that? And two, how does that impact a youth minister trying to get unity going in the way you're talking about, when mom and dad may be at a very different place than the kids? You're muted, man. I'm sorry, you got muted there somehow. Sorry. Can you unmute him, Jules? Still can't hear you. It's that little mute button in the bottom left corner, I think.
I apologize. Lost my
There
mouse.
you go.
So
You're
I
on
couldn't
there.
find it.
You're on.
I apologize. Okay.
That's all right.
Here's what I'll say. I am finding that many of the students are not far from their parents.
Wow.
I know that sounds,
Okay.
that may sound, and I wouldn't have thought it, okay, except that especially over this past election year, as you know, people start talking about, you know, all these things that are important to you, and you start now students are way more PC. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Okay.
way more politically correct. And they also have this heart for inclusiveness.
Yeah.
Okay. So they've got that. And that's kind of the separation that I see. Okay. And this may be just our place. Okay. So remember my context. Your context may be different. So understand that. But man, I've just found that, especially the microaggression stuff, okay, they come from a place so deep within that half the time we don't know they're coming out. And so we take what we have gleaned from what's around us.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're living in a home with people that you trust, and many of our kids do trust their family and so forth, those things just kind of come with them.
Yeah.
And they come out, and they may come out even differently than their parents, but it comes out, you know, and sometimes it comes out the same way. You're like, oh, I know exactly where that comes from. I've heard your parents say that, you know? And so I would say that they're not as far off as we think on the inside. So rhetoric may be different, but on the inside.
I hear you saying they've just got better filters. They may be able to stop it a little more often than dad or mom will.
Right.
So can you speak for a moment to what you do, whether it's through Bridge Builders and work with the teens? What's the most effective things you've done to help people on either side of that microaggression moment, whether receiving or giving, to see it, to get it, to understand it, and to begin to change it?
The best thing that we're doing right now, okay, remember we're only a year old, is Be the Bridge, where we're having people get around tables, and we're just piloting our student one. So we've done this with adults first, okay?
What does it look like?
It's a 10-week session. You really kind of come in and you start to talk about, man, here are the things that are going on, making ourselves aware, going, man, what do we do about that? How do we acknowledge that? Then when we acknowledge that, what's my part that I play in that? How do I lament, confess, repent of that, so forth? And then once you get to that point, go, okay, what do we do next? What are our next steps to help that? Okay. And that's a 10-week process, short version of it.
Wow.
The beauty of it, I say 10 session. I would say do it 10 weeks because, man, because you just go through a lot. There's a lot of opening up, and you get to experience the heart of people around you, which is extremely important in that. Okay. You end up coming away with family, not just people you've talked to about the issue. You come away hopefully with friends and allies.
Hey, I'm thinking of the youth ministers out there going, be the bridge. And we just got that. Thank you, Julia, for the link in the chat line there. Is there a cost for the program? Is it just a ministry that somebody's doing and they're saying, here's this stuff?
There is a cost. It's not very high. I mean, there's a cost for the materials. I want to say it's like maybe $20 or something like that. And I think the student one is cheaper. So, and it's a shorter, by the way. The student one is 6 sessions, and there's a lot of video and all sorts of other stuff with that. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
What is it that why is it that Be the Bridge is your go-to? I mean, just for your recommendation.
Yeah, well, it's my go-tos because it forces people to, or I'm not say force, it invites people to be around the table, and really dig in, really listen and hear from the others. Like I said, you'll get a lot of information that you talked about, but that's not the big deal. The big deal is you come away hopefully locking arms with folks, locking arms with people you didn't know before, understanding where they come from better. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the big deal about that.
Well, I know there's going to be some questions, and guys, if you want to drop your questions in the chat line, I'm going to let Tquan, kind of conclude if there are some calls that you want to make or things you think are important, and then we'll give a moment for some questions.
Yeah, I want to say one last thing, and that is one of the main things I'm learning like this last 2 weeks is, man, you need to be able to find allies. And there's a difference between what I'm calling fans and what I'm calling allies. Okay. Neither one is good or bad. I think they're both good, actually. Okay. But I feel like we've got a lot of people who encourage us, cheer for us. Yes, we want to see this. This is awesome. Okay. And that's beneficial. But the allies are the ones who are in the trenches taking, if I can use a football scenario, if I've got the ball and I'm running, they're laying their body on the line and putting a block in place for me. They're risking stuff. The allies are already doing things, which is what I'm finding. Like they're so in that I don't have to invite them. They're knocking on the door and saying, hey man, how can I help? Or I did this, how do you feel about that? Was that okay? That's what they're doing. Okay. And you can change a fan to an ally. Okay. But your allies are the ones that we just need more of them. And you can look whatever race it is. You need to understand that the Hills, this kind of getting to this spot didn't start with me. It started with Rick, who is our preacher, and I would say Ron Holland and Dave Meyer, all white dudes. Okay. And so just hear that God put it on their heart and they began to take that. And so I'm just fortunate to be coming along at this time for this stage in this season. Does that make sense? But
Yeah.
those allies leading the way is a big deal.
Is it unfair to say that having a person from a minority culture or a person of color like yourself to be able to lead it, would you say, boy, I would go for that? Or would you say that's irrelevant?
You need to have people of color in leadership roles in it. So, for example, Unity Builders, we are co-led on purpose. Okay. We have an Anglo lady right now. Her name is Julie, and myself are leading at this time period. And we'll probably switch it up here in another year or so. Okay. But we're doing that strategically so that it's not people aren't seeing we're leaning too far one way or too far the other way, that we are about unity. See what I'm saying? And so we're doing this together. And that may not be the most efficient way to do things, but it's the right way to do things for us.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Did you start out with a big congregational announcement? Was there a hoopla about this, or is this kind of a little seed planting, growing thing?
It's definitely a seed plant. Like most people right now, if you bump into somebody at the Hill, say, hey, what's Unity Builders? Like, I don't know, I have a clue. And so we're trying to really get our name out there and let them know, hey, this is what we're doing. It's beneficial. Join the club, you know? So.
And for the teen ministry, did you do it by invite, or how'd you engage the teens?
The teens, it's been by invite. You know, some people that we know that were already kind of leaning that right way, whether it was discussions that we just had, you know, over the past summer or so forth, with everything that came up, people were talking. And so, you know, some of those already who are ready. Okay. And not just people who are talking about it or ranting about it, but people have a heart for it and, you know, for making things different.
Okay. I see already a question that's popped up here, and that is Bridge Builders a thing you'd say junior high and high school? The comment was, hey, we can't help these kids too early. What's your sense of the age appropriateness of the material?
I can't speak too much to the, because I haven't dived so much into the student material. We have another group of people leading that right now. Okay. But I would say this, junior high is not too early. Middle school is not too early. And if you need to take the material and tweak it for the middle school, then do it, which is what we do all the time. I mean, how many times do we take some material and we're like, oh, this is good, this is junk, this will work, okay, and then you put your own twist on it. So we do that all the time. I would say do the same with that.
One more question here. If you're at a church where maybe the ministers and the executive minister, as you mentioned at your place, Rick and Dave and others, may not be as aware, tuned in, or even interested, but you're sitting there in the pew, or you're the youth guy going, this needs to happen. Would you just run the program on the youth side, or does it need to have that, you know, public upfront leadership, especially if it's a seed kind of growing ministry?
You know, I would say go wherever God gives you the opening. Get started. It definitely helps having our front guys leading the charge and saying, yes, we are for this. Okay. But get started. Now, I wouldn't say do it behind their back. That's not good. Okay. Bring them in, let them know what your heart is and what you're hoping to do. Because Satan will use that. We already have seeds of division everywhere. And so we start doing things behind people's back and so forth, and that just breeds more of that.
One last question. Somebody asked, would you suggest, from what you know, running a separate parent session from the kids program, or doing something together?
That's how we do it right now.
Okay.
One, because there's two different curriculums. Okay. I could see some great benefit if you chose to try to, you know, or if we chose to try to go, hey, we want to get families doing this. You know, I could see that being really awesome, but I don't know the logistics of making that happen. So I wouldn't be opposed to it, but that's not what we're doing right now.
Super. Well, man, thank you so much. Okay.